Welcome to Creepy Mysteries. Before moving to the story, I just want to take a moment. Every story here is crafted to take you on a spine-chilling journey. If you enjoy what you hear and want more tales of the unknown, consider subscribing to the channel. It truly means the world to us. And if this story intrigued you, let us know by liking the video and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Your feedback helps us uncover even more mysteries to share with you. Now let's move on to the story. This story was sent in by someone I'll call David. It happened to him and two of his friends during a late-night drive that still haunts him to this day. It was the summer of 2021, and David and his friends, Mike and Chris, were on their way back home from a weekend road trip. They had spent the past few days camping in the mountains, and though they were exhausted, they decided to drive straight through the night to get home. The drive was long and uneventful at first. The highway was mostly empty, and the only sound in the car was the hum of the tires and the occasional joke between the friends to keep each other awake. Around 1 a.m., they turned onto a stretch of road that cut through a heavily wooded area. The trees on either side seemed to close in on them, their dark silhouettes illuminated only by the car's headlights. After about 30 minutes of driving through the forest, they saw something up ahead, a figure standing on the side of the road. It was a young woman, wearing a pale dress that almost glowed in the headlights. She looked to be in her early 20s with long, dark hair that obscured part of her face. She wasn't waving for help or trying to flag them down. She was just standing there, staring at the car as it approached. Chris, who was in the passenger seat, nudged David. "Are we really going to drive past her?" David hesitated. "I don't know, man. It's the middle of the night. She could be in trouble." Mike, sitting in the back seat, chimed in. "Or it could be a setup. What if someone's waiting in the woods to jump us?" Despite his friend's warnings, David slowed down and rolled down the window slightly as they pulled up next to her. "Hey, are you okay? Do you need help?" The woman turned to look at him. Her expression was blank, almost emotionless. Then she spoke, her voice soft but clear. "I need a ride. Can you take me home?" David exchanged a quick glance with Chris. "Where do you live?" he asked. She pointed down the road, her hand trembling slightly. "Just a few miles ahead." David felt uneasy, but something about her seemed genuine. Against Mike's protests, he unlocked the back door and told her to get in. She climbed in without a word and sat quietly, staring out the window. The car was filled with a strange tension as they drove. The woman didn't say much, only giving occasional directions. David tried to make small talk, asking where she was coming from, but she gave short, vague answers. She didn't have a bag or a phone with her, and her clothes looked oddly outdated, like something from the 1970s. After about 10 minutes, she pointed to a small dirt road leading off the highway. "Turn here," she said. The road was narrow and unlit, with trees looming overhead. David slowed the car, his grip tightening on the wheel. The further they drove, the darker it seemed to get. The trees almost seemed alive, their branches reaching out like skeletal arms. "Are you sure this is the right way?" Chris asked, his voice uneasy. "Yes," she replied softly. They continued down the road for what felt like an eternity, and then, without warning, the woman spoke again. "Stop here." David hit the brakes, and the car came to a halt in front of an old run-down house. The windows were boarded up, and the yard was overgrown with weeds. It didn't look like anyone had lived there in decades. "Are you sure this is your house?" David asked, turning to look at her. But when he turned around, the back seat was empty. The woman was gone. Panic set in immediately. Chris and Mike started yelling, frantically looking around the car and outside, but there was no sign of her. The doors had never opened, and they hadn't heard a single sound. David felt a chill run down his spine as he stared at the house. Something about it seemed wrong, almost sinister. "We need to get out of here," he said, his voice shaking. As he turned the car around, Mike pointed out something horrifying. There was a photo taped to one of the boarded-up windows of the house. Even from a distance, they could see it clearly, a photo of the woman they had just picked up. They didn't stick around to investigate. David floored the gas pedal, speeding back down the dirt road and onto the highway. They didn't stop until they were miles away, the eerie silence of the car broken only by their heavy breathing. Later, after they got home, David couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to know more about what had happened. He did some research on the area and found a local legend about a young woman who had been killed in a hit-and-run accident on that stretch of road decades ago. According to the stories, she was often seen hitchhiking, trying to find her way home. David and his friends still don't know what they encountered that night, but one thing is certain: they'll never forget the vanishing hitchhiker. In the summer of 2023, two close friends, Jason and Tyler, decided to take a cross-country road trip. It was supposed to be a much-needed break from their stressful jobs. The plan was simple: drive from New York to California, stopping along the way to see landmarks, eat good food, and make some memories. One evening, as they crossed through a rural part of Arkansas, Tyler suggested taking an old scenic highway he'd read about online. It wasn't on the GPS, but the article claimed it offered incredible views and was a hidden gem for road trippers. Jason hesitated at first, but the idea of a quieter, more picturesque drive sounded appealing, so they agreed. The first few miles of the road were as advertised. Beautiful trees lined the highway, and the setting sun cast a golden glow on the pavement. But after about an hour, the road seemed to stretch on forever. The scenic views were replaced by dense woods on either side, and there were no signs of other cars, houses, or even gas stations. It wasn't until they passed a rusty, abandoned truck on the side of the road for the second time that they realized something was wrong. "Didn't we pass that truck already?" Jason asked, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "No way," Tyler replied, although his voice wavered. "It's probably just a coincidence. Let's keep going." But a growing sense of unease settled over them. They continued driving for another half hour, and when they rounded a bend, they saw the same truck again. Same rusted body, same flat tires, and the same shattered windshield. Jason slammed on the brakes. "We're going in circles." Tyler checked the GPS, but it couldn't find a signal. They decided to turn around and head back the way they came. But after driving for another 20 minutes, they realized they were still on the same stretch of road. Panic started to set in. The woods seemed darker now, and the sun had completely disappeared, replaced by an unnerving fog that crept in from the trees. Suddenly, a dimly lit gas station appeared on the side of the road, a building they were certain hadn't been there before. Relieved, they pulled in and parked. Inside, an old man sat behind the counter, his face pale and wrinkled. He didn't greet them, just stared with hollow eyes as they approached. Excuse me," Jason started nervously. "We're trying to get back to the main road, but I think we're lost. Can you give us directions?" The old man didn't respond at first. He just stared past them, as if looking at something behind them. Finally, he spoke in a low, raspy voice. "You boys shouldn't have taken this road. It doesn't like visitors." "What do you mean?" Tyler asked, his voice trembling. "You're on the Devil's Loop," the man continued. "A cursed highway. Once you're on it, it doesn't let you go. It'll keep you here, driving in circles, until it gets what it wants." "What does it want?" Jason demanded, his heart racing. The old man didn't answer. Instead, he reached under the counter and slid a flashlight toward them. "You're gonna need this." Confused and terrified, they left the gas station and got back into the car. As they drove, the woods seemed alive. Shadows darted between the trees, and faint whispers filled the air. Tyler turned on the flashlight, aiming it into the forest, and for a split second, they saw a figure standing in the trees. It wasn't a person. It was tall, pale, and impossibly thin, with glowing eyes that followed the car as they passed. "We have to get off this road," Jason said, speeding up. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening, and the fog thickened until they could barely see. When they reached another bend, the figure they'd seen in the woods was now standing in the middle of the road, forcing Jason to swerve. The car skidded off the pavement and into a ditch, stalling out. When they looked back, the figure was gone. Panicked, they abandoned the car and ran into the woods, hoping to find a way out. The whispers followed them, growing louder, more aggressive. Jason thought he heard his name being called in the distance. But when he turned, Tyler was gone. He searched for hours, calling out Tyler's name, but the only response was the sound of leaves crunching behind him. Every time he turned around, the figure was closer, its glowing eyes locked on him. Jason's body was found 3 days later, lying on the side of the road. Tyler was never found. To this day, the Devil's Loop remains an urban legend among locals. Some say it's just a story to keep travelers away from the old highway. Others claim it's real, and that once you enter, you'll never leave. That's for today from Creepy Mysteries. Hope you enjoyed the stories. If you enjoyed the stories and want more tales that send chills down your spine, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. And remember, the scariest stories are often the ones that feel a little too real. Until next time, stay safe and stay in the light.